The recent Supreme Court immunity decision has reignited questions about the president's pardon power, a power that lacks any clear restraints and is ripe for abuse. My next guest's new book investigates the executive power and details how accountability is needed in order to help preserve our democracy. She writes, quote, "The Trump administration showed us that in the wrong hands, the president's pardon power is poised to become a devastatingly sinister tool of corruption and abuse. It's time for the pardon power to shrink, possibly into obscurity. Democracy will no doubt be better for it." Joining me now is Kim Whaley, professor of law at the University of Baltimore and the author of Pardon Power, How the Pardon System Works and Why. Kim, it's an honor to have you on the show. I'm so excited about your book, and I can't wait for everybody to get their hands on it to read it. Let's start with the foundational how, though. Let's start with that basic premise. How can a president pardon him or herself?
Well, the how is really leads to the question of if they were to do that, what's the pushback? And the issue in this moment, and it's just strengthened, I think, by the court's immunity decision, is whether there are any checks and balances on the presidency anymore. If the president were to pardon him or herself, who would stop them? Who would push back on them? That's really the question. Even a pardon for bribes, Katie, I think that's a possibility now that the Supreme Court has put the presidency above the law, even when it comes to committing crimes in office.
So, Kim, your book traces the origins of the pardon power going as far back as the English monarchy. That idea of investing that type of power in the executive branch stems from the English monarchy. We left the monarchy, right, Kim? We left the idea of having a king. And putting aside our opinions about that immunity decision, why did the framers include this executive action in the Constitution?
Well, they really seem to believe, at least Madison and Hamilton kind of carried the day on the idea that there needs to be some person of judgment that can exercise mercy if the criminal justice system goes awry. Remember, in common law England, there wasn't a constitution with constitutional rights for defendants. There wasn't even a criminal jury system until the 1200s, and appeals and all those measures of fairness. And that whole apparatus didn't exist at the federal level when the Constitution was ratified either. And frankly, I think the framers didn't foresee the kind of corruption we've seen lurking around the Oval Office. They sort of knew each other back in 1788 and trusted that whoever would have that kind of power would use it judiciously and fairly.
Until somebody named Donald Trump comes along and shows what he's capable of doing when he holds office of the presidency. You said here, there is a CBS poll that found that 62% of Americans, Kim, oppose pardons for the January 6th rioters who forced their way into the U.S. Capitol. And yet Donald Trump has still promised to pardon them if he comes back into office. He says he's going to pardon, quote, a large portion of them. Kim, I wanted to ask you, we always talk about the pocket pardon, this idea of a president pardoning him or herself. But then there's also the ability for the president to pardon others. In this instance, what kind of long-term consequences could we see if we see somebody like Donald Trump back in the Oval pardoning the January 6th insurrectionists?
Well, it might have been that poll or another one over the summer where people were asked, why are you against pardons for the January 6th insurrectionists? And the answer was, and this was Republicans and Democrats, I'm paraphrasing, we don't want to encourage or greenlight political violence around elections. That if a president were to come in and say, you are patriots, I'm going to wash away all of the implications of the criminal justice system, the statutes that Congress enacted, the work of juries and judges, and let you walk on the theory that you're a patriot, that encourages that kind of behavior. But honestly, even more concern could be what Donald Trump will do for himself with a pardon. Now that the Supreme Court has said you can use official power to commit crimes, you're going to have to get people to execute your orders to commit crimes using official power. Those folks are not covered by immunity. But if Donald Trump were, as he did with some of those who engaged in the 2016 election interference, Roger Stone and Paul Manafort, if he were to pardon cronies or people in the White House, if they commit crimes on his behalf, Katie, we not only have a president above the law, but we have those around a president above the law if they're willing to commit crime. So the pardon, in connection with that immunity decision, is extraordinarily dangerous in the wrong hands.
So I have to ask, is there an expiration date on a pocket pardon? Let's just say hypothetically Donald Trump pardoned himself. The fact that he hasn't used that pardon at this point in time, signifies to me or militates to the fact that maybe he didn't do that. But is there an expiration date on a presidential pardon in any way?
No, I mean, the pardon power is very vague. So something like that would have to be established either through precedent or it'd have to be established through a Supreme Court ruling. I mean, I tend to agree with you. He dangled this pocket pardon while he was in office. He's smart about things like this. And if the Supreme Court at some point doesn't continue to give him win after win in these federal cases, it's not inconceivable that he will pull out a pocket pardon that he gave himself during his last term in office. And that would be yet another constitutional crisis triggered by Donald J. Trump.
Kim Whaley, this conversation needs to be longer, and I need you to come back so we can talk about it more. But in the meantime, folks need to go out and read your new book, because not only is it historically just tracking what happens with this pardon, but it does talk about the dangers that could happen with the pardon power. Kim Whaley, thank you so much for the privilege of your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Katie. It's been terrific.